Tonight we're going to have a special report with the land commissioner who's going to back armed citizens marching at the Alamo, because that's Texas law. You can open carry, the Second Amendment. But the San Antonio police chief says he's going to arrest anybody that exercises their Second Amendment. We're going to have reporters there coming up in a week and a half in San Antonio. So here's that clip.
This isn't about violating people's rights. It's not about gun control. It's not about politics. It's about the state law. If the firearm is carried in a manner calculated to cause alarm. And in the officer's opinion at the Starbucks, this was the case, and that's why those people were cited.
Share this video with a friend.
I'm here with Jerry Patterson, the next Lieutenant Governor. How are you doing, Mr. Patterson?
I'm doing really well.
So can you just explain to us the position of Lieutenant Governor and what you hope to achieve?
Well, the Lieutenant Governor is arguably the most powerful position in Texas government. And I'm not seeking power, but I frankly think that we are on the cusp of going the wrong direction in Texas. And we need somebody who is not afraid, somebody who's straight, and I mean straight in the sense that I tell you what I think, and somebody who has specific things that he or she, in this case he, wishes to accomplish. And if you go to my website, votepatterson.com, unlike all the other candidates, you're going to see a very detailed enumeration of things having to do with the Second Amendment, and I encourage folks to go and read what I say about that. Water, transportation, education, immigration. So I think folks are looking for leadership, and I think we have too many candidates who are more interested in looking good and who are more interested in the next election than the next generation. And I'm only focused on doing what I think is right, like some politicians and some office holders from the past in Texas. We have too few of them today.
Recently we saw the issues with the people at the Texas Capitol building and the people out there carrying their black powder pistols, and it's my understanding that you actually wrote that law.
The definitions in chapter 46, 01 definitions in this chapter, firearm does not include antique or curio firearm manufactured before 1899 or a replica of an antique or curio firearm manufactured before 1899, but only if the replica does not use rimfire or centerfire ammunition. And mine is a ball and cap.
I was the author of the Texas Concealed Handgun Law in 1995, and one of the items of unfinished business was I wanted to make these cap and ball replica revolvers not firearms under the law. So after I left the legislature, I wrote this statute. I gave it to a state rep and a state senator. They passed it, testified in favor of it. So I know the law very well. And a cap and ball revolver that does not shoot centerfire, rimfire ammunition under the law is not a firearm. And that's under state and federal law. So they had no firearm. And their arrest was unlawful. The law says you have to carry this firearm in a manner calculated to alarm. Now, carrying a pistol in a holster is not calculated to alarm. And think about the interesting testimony that's going to be, I guess, at trial, when at the same time that we're arresting this guy for carrying an antique replica pistol that under the law is not a firearm, at the same time, right there, were citizens lawfully carrying ARs and AKs, sling arms, and they weren't arrested. So to the average bystander walking around, assuming that anybody was alarmed, and frankly they should not be, why would you arrest a guy with an antique pistol that's not even a firearm under federal or state law? But then it's okay with the AKs and the ARs. It should be okay with AKs and ARs. That is the law in Texas. Open carry of a long gun is not unlawful in Texas. And so what we have here is somebody, and I don't know, I doubt that it was the DPS officer, but somebody decided to make up law and say, I'm alarmed. You know, you have to have a reasonable standard to this. You can't just say, I'm alarmed. I mean, there are people who are easily alarmed. They don't make law either. Somebody has to have a reasonable standard. These gentlemen were arrested unlawfully. They broke no law, and I'm anxious to see how this turns out at trial.
Now, one of the things I'm anxious to see is this rally we have coming up on October 19th, where people are going to gather at the Alamo, carrying their long guns slung over their shoulders. Some people may have loaded firearms.
There's several different groups. In my view, they ought to kind of get together and just pick one person to be in charge of all this, because San Antonio PD has not been a friend of the Second Amendment.
This isn't about violating people's rights. It's not about gun control. It's not about politics. It's about the state law. If the firearm is carried in a manner calculated to cause alarm.
They consistently, repetitively, even going back 20 years when I carried the concealed handgun law, San Antonio PD was opposed to it. Now, there were other police officers and police chiefs that were opposed to it, most of whom have come around and say, you know, I was wrong. DA in Harris County, Johnny Holmes, was adamantly opposed to it and wrote me a letter about 3 years after we passed it and says, I was wrong. So it's really refreshing to see some folks fess up when they're wrong, but San Antonio PD has a policy about open carry, and they are not going to allow it. They have no authority to make up the law, and that's what they're doing. So I hope that San Antonio PD complies with the law.
Now, as more and more people move here to Texas, we see Rick Perry campaigning to get people to come here to the state of Texas. Does this concern you at all? Because we have many people with many different ideologies.
It does concern me. We have people moving here from foreign countries like California that I am concerned about. As long as they come to Texas and they're coming here because they share our values, they share our belief in the Second Amendment, which has nothing to do with hunting. It has nothing to do with recreational use. It has nothing to do with collecting. It has only to do with my God-given, constitutionally enumerated right to keep and bear arms to defend myself against a criminal element or an oppressive government. That's what it's about. And as long as they believe that way, as well as the other freedoms, and as long as they believe that we, don't need any more government regulation, that we have too much government, and they're coming here for those reasons, then I'm fine with it. I don't care where they come from. And it's a good thing. People came to Texas in the 1830s and 1840s and 60s because they were seeking liberty and opportunity. Same thing today. But they, in my view, they need to understand our values may be different than the values where they came from.
Are you an advocate for state nullification?
We have the ability under the Constitution to ignore whatever law is unconstitutional. Now, how do you make that determination? If the federal government were to pass a law and say, well, you can no longer carry your firearm, or we're going to pass a law that says we're going to outlaw open carry of long guns, yeah, that would be an unconstitutional law. And frankly, I don't know if nullification, I just go with ignoring. As land commissioner, I travel quite a bit. I've spent quite a bit of time in the Big Bend National Park because we have some land adjacent to it. At one time, you could not carry in a national park. You couldn't possess a firearm. I ignored it. Told the San Antonio newspaper I ignored it. They wrote an editorial saying he ignores the law. I said, I'm sorry, that's not the law. It's unconstitutional. When I go into border areas along the Texas border, I'm armed. And unless it's private property, where the private property owner has a right to tell me I can't be there armed, but if it's public property, I'm armed. And so I ignore laws that I believe to be unconstitutional.
As far as those unconstitutional laws, do you think that extends to the TSA?
I think it extends to the TSA in some circumstances. It depends on how the TSA conducts themselves. Cavity searches, of course, we have some problems with cavity searches here in Texas with other law enforcement agencies, but it extends to how they conduct themselves. What do they do? And I would submit to you that sometimes they are infringing on the rights and the personal rights of privacy. Other times they are not. I don't think you can blanket make a statement on that many TSA officers. I try not to fly commercial if I can help it. I got a little airplane, I fly it, or I drive.
Now we see the city of Chicago has now been deemed the murder capital of the United States of America, even though it has some of the strictest gun laws. So let me ask you, how do you feel about gun-free zones?
Well, they're a target-rich environment for the criminal element. I mean, I talk about this a great deal. I mean, I'm probably the guy that most people call when it comes to the Second Amendment and firearms. And I use the analogy, had I been in the theater in Aurora, Colorado, fewer people would have died. And that was a gun-free zone. It was private property, and they had banned carry. And people, when I say that, they look at me and say, oh, that's impossible. I mean, that guy had he had an AR, and he had body armor and all of that stuff. And I say, look, The first time someone had returned fire to that, in the direction of that shooter, the first time a round had gone off and it didn't come from the shooter, the dynamic would have changed. You don't have to bring him down to save lives. And instead of that shooter just calmly walking up and down the aisles, you know, just shooting cowering theater goers as they cowered on the floor, shooting in the back of the head, the first time you popped a round off, that shooter would have had to pay attention to something else. The dynamic would have changed. Similarly, in Virginia Tech, 32 people died, gun-free zone. And by the way, that shooter had passed a background check. He was mentally ill, had been adjudicated mentally ill, passed the check anyway. All of these venues, they're gun-free zones. And, you know, when I passed the concealed handgun law, we had to put some gun-free zones to get the votes I needed. Over the years, we have eliminated and removed many of those gun-free locations. One of them is kind of funny. One of the locations that was prohibited initially was churches. Well, I believe that violates the separation. There is no separation, but it violates the church ability to do what they wish. But, you know, frankly, if you have, you know, a congregation that's packing, the sermons are, you know, much shorter and much more to the point. But we continued to eliminate gun-free zones. A gun-free zone is nothing more than an invitation.
You have an A+ rating from the NRA, so guns are definitely an important issue to you. But what else do the people of Texas need to know?
Well, you know, I was a guy who, probably the three most significant items that I passed when I was in the Senate, I repealed the motorcycle helmet law. That's kind of a liberty thing. And, you know, I passed the concealed handgun law. I passed a constitutional amendment to allow citizens to access their home equity without government interference and telling them for what you know, purpose they can access their home equity. So I'm kind of a pro-liberty guy. And I believe that government, in its zeal to raise the floor and bring everybody up, has to recognize that in doing so, in order to fund that, you also have to lower the ceiling. I want the opportunity in Texas to make a mistake. Because whether that's a financial mistake, you know, investing my money, because without that opportunity to take choices and take chances, then we also have the diminished opportunities to succeed. And I grew up in Texas, and I went to school in the 50s. Everything was open to me. And today, you know, I have children, I have grandchildren. I want them to have those same opportunities. And I see an oppressive federal government that with a do-gooder mentality continues to pass statutes such as the Endangered Species Act, you know, a lot of other so-called well-intended items of legislation. That mindset is not here in Texas, and we should be thankful for that, but it's creeping this way. And we have to, in my view, maintain Texas as it is and as it was. And not only is that good for Texas, Texas has the ability to lead and redeem this nation because we are liberty. And there are a few other states, but we're the prime state that can redeem this nation. VotePatterson.com.
All right, Jerry Patterson, thank you for your time, sir.
All right, thank you, Jakari.